That's cinema, baby.
No, Mr. Wilson. I don't have to take that kind of talk from anyone.
That's right, you don't. How about going outside and trying to kick me around?
I'm not supposed to fight with the guests, Mr. Wilson.
I'm not a guest tonight, you yellow bastard. I happen to be an intruder.
Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, a film podcast where we pair movies to garner a better understanding of the filmmakers who make those movies, and occasionally we have guests on. I am your host, Ryan.
On the advice of my attorney, I'm only allowed to say my name and city of residence. My name is Thomas. I live in Portland, Oregon.
I am also a host. My name is Ken, and this week we are joined by Jack.
Hi.
Chit chat. Back to you, Thomas. You're supposed to go on with this podcast.
No, I thought you were going to... I thought that was just a note for you to put in the chit chat. We'll cut all that out.
Yeah.
Double it. Hey, in this podcast, when we're not chit-chatting, we do a deep dive on directors' paired films and their backgrounds, often adding our insights. We started this back with Clint Eastwood, 3 seasons, nothing but Clint. But this season, we're doing something a little bit different. It's a 4x4, and we're now on our third of 4 directors. That third director was chosen by Ryan. Ryan, who are we going to start talking about?
William Wyler. Willie the Wile. Yes. William Wyler.
What are the first 2 films that we're pairing from Mr. Wyler's filmography?
Overall, we're going to be talking about 4 Wyler classics, but this week we're going to talk about 2 of his 1950s noirs. We're going to talk about Detective Story and Desperate Hours.
Desperate
Yeah,
Hours.
Yeah. The one good choice made in the Mickey Rourke remake is dropping the because it's cleaner.
Yeah, some MBA in the studio got a bonus before that movie came out for that idea.
Yeah.
What if we dropped the? Give that man a raise.
Yeah.
This picture's gonna do gangbusters.
That and a bunch of unnecessary nudity is how you know it was made in the 90s.
Oh, my interest is piqued.
That's not your interest, Ken.
Yeah, so Ryan, you went back and forth on like 16 different directors.
Yes.
Wyler was always your number 1 choice, and we finally fell back to it. And I'm grateful for it. But tell us why you picked Wyler, and before we started doing this and talking about it, what his films maybe meant to you and a little bit of his background.
Yeah, that's a great call out that I was wishy-washy about it, Ken. And a big part of why is because, I really got into Wyler during the pandemic, and he is a much more classical Hollywood director working in an older period than most of the other stuff that we have covered. So I wasn't really sure if it was going to fly with you all, because we don't often talk about movies from the 50s or 60s. And then in addition, I'd kind of watch these movies alone. My wife is not into classic cinema like I have suddenly in the last 5 years really gotten into. Quite frankly, I didn't know if these movies would be any good to anyone else. Like if it was just something I kind of stumbled upon and was like, oh, I love this old Kirk Douglas shit. And then somebody else would see it and be like, that is very boring. Generic white man. You know, like when Tony Soprano tries to get his kids interested in old movies that he's watching on the television while eating his ice cream sundae. And they're just like, sure, Dad. And they walk out the door. I was afraid you guys were going to go all Anthony on me.
That's a deep reference to The Sopranos. Thank you for that.
So I finally settled on William Wyler. Have you guys, before this, had you seen any of his films or any of these films?
The 2 we're pairing for these 2 episodes, no, I haven't, but I've seen a couple of his. I never knew him as like William Wyler as a filmography and whatnot. But I mean, I've like the Best Years of Our Lives. Is that the World War II one? Yeah. That's such a great fucking movie.
Yeah, it really is.
That's probably the one I saw that I probably should have watched more of his, but I didn't. I remember renting that at Movie Madness in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, wow.
Shout out.
Shout out.
But I don't know anything about William Wyler. Can you tell us a little bit about
I would be happy
who
to.
he is, where he's from, what's his deal?
Yeah. So I originally I had seen Best Years of Our Lives, which is incredible, in film school. And for some reason, that and Ben-Hur are really the only films I think that survive. And Best Years of Our Lives with reputation amongst film students because of its unique approach to the war. And then Ben-Hur just because it won all those Oscars and is famous for the chariot race and et cetera, et cetera. I actually discovered Detective Story because I was on a Kirk Douglas streak. And he had all these free movies on Canopy, and Detective Story was one of them. And that made me really interested to watch more. Big Willie, as we call him, even though we don't actually know how tall he was born in Germany to Jewish parents at the turn of the 20th century. So probably actually short. Probably is actually a little Willie. And Willie was a little wild. He got into one little fight and his mom got scared. So she sent him off on a ship to go to work for his cousin and get some fresh air on the way to America, that is.
America.
This was in 1921. He landed in New York. He had a job working for a distant cousin at Universal Studios. At the time, the big Hollywood studios had only just recently moved to Hollywood, and all of their distribution operation was still based on the East Coast. So it was like the movies got made in LA, but the prints were struck and sent out from New York. So he started there, and he started volunteering immediately in the National Guard. He seemed to have an incredible sense of patriotism from literally the moment he landed, and that will be a huge part of his life later. He was able to get transferred to Hollywood, and within 3 years, he started as just a gaffer and set builder to rising to director. So in 22, he's sweeping up at the end of the day. And in 25, he is directing his first Western. If anybody has seen Babylon, this is what William Wyler was doing, that incredible set piece where they're out in the middle of the field filming 12 movies at once. Like, that was the type of work that he was doing in Hollywood when he started. And so over the next 45 years, he directed 56 films, which sounds like a lot, but that's because in the 20s, he was literally doing 6 a year. So he didn't slow down until really the late 30s. It is really weird, as you said, Ken, that nobody knows him as William Wyler. I didn't know him either, but it's weird that that's the case because he's been nominated for Best Director 12 times, more than anyone else.
What?
Yes. He's won 3 times. He produces all of his own movies, so his 3 Best Director film wins are also Best Picture wins, making him one of the most awarded directors in Hollywood history.
Wow.
Yeah, just crazy. And literally the only thing we hear is like Ben-Hur and like, oh yeah, that somebody died making that chariot race. Did you know that?
Wait, what?
I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about Wyler's involvement in the war because not only is that one of the things that he really should be much more famous for, but I think it had a huge role on all the movies of his that I love and kind of his approach to cinema at large. So even though he was 40 when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, he immediately volunteered and joined the Air Force. In 1939 and 1940, he made a movie called Miss Miniver, which didn't get released stateside until 42. Miss Miniver was about a British woman trying to start a family on the British home front during the fight with Germany. So it's like a pretty kind of, I think it would be almost boring today to pretty much anyone, but she just wants to have a normal life, and Hitler and his fucking problems keep interrupting it. And that movie was so great at capturing a sympathetic plea for why America should join the war, that Roosevelt and Churchill actually had war resources diverted to strike more prints of that movie to get it out more so that more and more people could see it. It was considered one of the frontline attacks that Roosevelt was using to throw back the nationalists who wanted to stay out of the war. He was Miss Miniver. It was like
you mean propaganda?
Yes.
Okay.
Miss Miniver does not feel it is artful. I think propaganda very specifically just has no real art value, but it's definitely got a huge and aggressive point of view.
So just to add on to that, it was his greatest financial success. It was the top grossing film of 1942, but would stay that for the next 10 years.
Yes.
And the only thing that would beat it out would be Gone with the Wind.
Yeah.
Really?
It won 6 Oscars.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a huge film. And
clickety clack.
So after making Miss Miniver and becoming so valuable to Roosevelt's propaganda machine, Wyler was one of the 5 Hollywood directors who was enlisted to make propaganda films about the war. So Wyler went back into the Air Force and made several documentaries from inside of a B-52 bomber or an attack fighter, filming the action. And sometimes there was enough room for an AD and a sound guy. Sometimes he was taking turns running the bombing routes with the AD. So, so he was in the sky. On one of his runs, his assistant director got killed. A couple weeks later, he was trying to finish the same movie, and a flak explosion near his plane was so loud that it shattered the window and not permanently, but semi-permanently deafened him in the left ear. It blew out his eardrum.
Wow.
And it was like a decade before he could hear again. So on the one hand, it was propaganda that he was enlisted and made a show of it, like, oh, he's William Wyler's joining the Air Force. On the other hand, he kind of earned it when he won the Purple Heart, because he was wounded. He was traumatized. And then, as you pointed out, Ken, when he came home, he made Best Years of Our Lives.
Okay.
And if Jack Thomas, are you familiar with this film, The Best Years of Our Lives?
I watched Lee watch it on a plane.
Oh, fast.
What about?
Yeah, it's phenomenally good from what my spouse said. Yeah.
And Jack and Thomas, what is your experience with Wyler and his films, if any at all, before these movies?
Well, you finally asked the youngins.
That was a great biography, brief biography of Wyler, by the way, Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course, I've seen Ben-Hur in a queer studies class. And
it's true. I don't know if that's just a joke, but I really hope it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And Lee has a fondness for The Little Foxes.
Oh, really?
So I ended up watching that.
Mm-hmm.
I had not seen any before these two, and that's a reason I'm really glad that you ended up going with William Wyler, because that's what the whole 4x4 thing is about.
Yeah.
Also, he was 5'8", so pretty short, I guess. That's shorter than me.
No, at the time it was he would be a Skyliner, like our buddy Ken.
Be like, we got a center at the Film Production Basketball League. Willie the Tower, we used to call him.
These two films have a few things in common. If we're going to take a pause on talking about Wyler, I think the coolest thing about him, as far as when these films came out, was that he was adamantly opposed and actively agitating against HUAC.
Yes.
Which would be kind of important because both of these films have actors who were taken in front of the subcommittee.
Oh, really?
Frederick March in the next film we're going to talk about. And in this week's film, of Detective Story, you have somebody by the name of Lee Grant.
Lee Grant. A favorite on the podcast. We did
back during our director's phase. I'm sorry, writer-director's phase, if I remember right. Or actor, also day job.
Side hustle. Side hustle.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that was her. I didn't put that together until just now.
Yeah.
Shoplifter.
So both of these films are shot in black and white by Lee Garms, same cinematographer. Both films were plays before the film was released. There's kind of an asterisk on that for the next film, but both have lawyer characters. Both have day drinking. In both, a protagonist takes a cab. A gun is stolen. You guys don't seem very excited by these. Okay, how about this? In both, a pivotal conversation takes place at the top of a building by the protagonist before confronting a major issue.
Okay.
Very
both
good.
have bikes outside the main set, if you consider a motorcycle a bike. Yeah.
Yeah.
Both have staircases. Wiley likes the staircases.
Yes.
And both have a major character who'd rather get shot than face the future.
Ooh, spoilers.
I would add, Thomas, that both have prominent storylines about veterans, even though in Desperate Hours it's more subtle.
Wyler did say, I guess he was a bit of a dick, is my understanding. Not.
Oh, really?
He at least would put actors through hell in a way of, I don't know if we talked about it on this podcast, but like David Fincher doing 100 takes. He was kind of the precursor to a lot of that.
Yes.
But the thing that kind of followed him around it seemed like in the 60s, and maybe why we don't know him so well, is that originally, when the French were talking about auteur and auteur theory, his name came up. And he was seen as a symbol of it. And it very shortly went to the background because he doesn't necessarily have according to this book from the Multnomah County Library by Gabriel Miller, just called William Wyler, he doesn't have a consistent visual style or personal preoccupation in themes, unlike a lot of people we think of when we think of as auteurs. And so he was also dismissed because of his fondness for adapting others' works and then tailoring the visual style to the screenplay as opposed to having his own.
Yeah, I, as someone who doesn't like the auteur theory, that's one of the things that I really admire about him. I do think he is more, having seen a good deal of his films now, I think he is somewhat auteur-y, particularly in the way that we now adopt the idea that Spielberg is an auteur, which 25 years ago that would have been a fight in words, but now is like pretty commonly accepted. But I think the filmmaker who most reminds me of Wyler is Spielberg, and I think they both have the same. Wyler's always returning to the same subtext, and the people relate to each other in similar fashions. There is almost always a veteran, for example, amongst the characters involved, little things like that. But I think he was anti-auteur personally, and I love him all the more for it.
Yeah,
I have a clarification to make. Anybody who would fight over the word auteur, it's going to be less a fight and more just a series of slaps.
Yeah, unless you're in the ring with Uwe Boll, in which case he's going to beat the shit out of you. According to the same book, William Wyler liked to quip, "I could hardly call myself an auteur, although I'm one of the few American directors who could pronounce the word correctly." I guess when I was thinking about that, I was thinking more like Ang Lee. Ang Lee. But I don't know if Ang Lee has even if you're saying that there is a consistent thread through Wyler's work, just like there is a consistent undertone Freudian thread or daddy issue thread through Spielberg.
Yeah.
Then
Well, and that's all of this is super interesting, Thomas, because one of the things I was thinking about leading up to this conversation, I sort of think that Wyler is not remembered because his movies form the basis of what we think about as the slightly politically progressive Hollywood issue or drama picture. He loves superstars, and he loves shooting superstars, and he loves giving them these big performances. And all the characters, like Ang Lee and like Spielberg both, every character in a William Wyler movie is well-rounded and has hopes and dreams and fears and hates and loves. And by the end of the film, whether you hate the character or love the character, like, you have seen a complete person. And I think that is increasingly rare in Hollywood, but was so common from the 60s to the 90s that it was just kind of assumed.
Yeah.
And I think I think he's kind of invisibly in every Hollywood movie made between 1955 and 2005, in a way, maybe.
Whoa.
Wow.
That's some galaxy brain shit right there.
Yeah.
So we're talking about Detective Story this week, based on a play. And it is a bit stage bound, not in a bad way. Does anybody want to take a stab at a very brief synopsis of somebody who hasn't seen Detective Story?
A synopsis of someone who hasn't seen the movie.
Yes, tell us about someone who hasn't seen it, like you 4 days ago.
Spartacus finds out about his wife's ex.
I think I can actually do it very briefly, Ken.
Okay, you're on a timer.
Yeah. It is a day in the life of a series of detectives who work at the same precinct. The main one is played by Kirk Douglas, and he is having a crisis of professional consciousness over an abortion doctor he's trying to get imprisoned. And then that turns into a personal crisis when he finds out more about his wife's past before they were married.
Yeah, it's so if you've seen Dirty Harry, Douglas's character is really a precursor to Dirty Harry.
Yeah.
And if you've seen the TV show Barney Miller, then basically the whole setup is like a very special episode of Barney Miller.
That's true. That's funny. It's I normally have a hard time with play adaptations, and I have a really hard time with one set films. But so maybe one of the reasons why I love Wyler so much is because some of my favorite of his films are one set from a play, and this is no exception. The way he makes it come alive is really magical to me.
It's a great pairing, these two, because of their backgrounds in plays. Also, this one was based on a very early Raymond Carver story called What We Talk About When We Can't Say the Word Abortion.
I was about to call you out on the chronology there, kid, but yeah. So what's wild? Okay, so yeah, I guess this movie came out in 1951. Let's go around the horn and just do what we normally do before the synopsis, which is, have you seen it before?
Nope.
No here.
Nope. Jack?
No, but now I have.
I saw it once during the pandemic, and that's it.
Okay. Yeah, so before this movie came out, Wyler did have the play. He had actually asked, I'm sorry, not Wyler, but Sidney Kinsley had written the play, and he'd asked Wyler to front some money for it. So they could get it produced, because they had worked together previously on a film called Dead End. And Dead End would star a young or younger Humphrey Bogart.
Yeah.
So they had some, him and Kinsley, Wyler and Kinsley had some history together prior to this. But Kinsley didn't want to adapt it. So Wyler would then turn to Dashiell Hammett.
Oh,
asked,
okay.
But who was being hounded by HUAC, by the House of Un-American Activities Committee. And because he was broke, right? So Wyler reached out to him, but Hammett just couldn't crack it, couldn't figure out how to move it to a more cinematic world. And so that's why I think it ended up with Wyler's brother to help adapt it.
That's fascinating. Yeah, his Wyler made, like I said, 50 something films. The 9 or 10 most financially successful and awarded of his movies were all made with his brother, who did some screenwriting and co-produced most of them.
Yeah. This was a record for him being able to shoot under 3 months. So to move away from those silent films, he, I guess, took a lot more time.
Mm-hmm.
And they came 6 days under schedule, thanks to Douglas wanting people to rehearse in a playhouse. He rented out a playhouse, I think, in Arizona. The Sombrero Playhouse. It's serious, in Phoenix, Arizona. And they ran through the play over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And because they shot it all using, most of it they shot on a crab dolly, and had the sets, they were downstairs and upstairs just next to each other. The illusion of going from one to the other. And they just rehearsed it over and over again. They rehearsed this, all the setups, so that they could basically like shoot it like a play.
Okay.
That makes sense. Yeah. It's very fluidly done, and I don't ever feel trapped in the space.
Well, one reason you don't is because they take some liberties with the play. They start off outside.
Yeah,
so in the play, there's some big differences, which like change how we see the film probably, because the play is really set in one room, just like the next movie we're going to talk about. So you add these two big outdoor scenes. One is the introduction of McLeod, the Douglas character.
McLeod.
And his partner, right? You see his partner bringing in Lee Grant. So you have the outside, and like you have a little bit more of you're not stuck in the precinct. You do get like some fresh air with those moments. But yeah, McLeod, I don't think you get his wife until the middle of the play. So that whole initial setup is something quite different when he's coming in. Like his introduction is bringing in the one-time Arthur Crook, the crook named Arthur, who's stealing from his boss.
Yeah,
and so that having him with his wife initially,
that's huge,
and being and like necking in the back of a taxi and being kind of humorous and seeing this other side of him completely changes it. And so you get that, and then also you don't get his boss shaving and talking to the lawyer. Instead, his partner's talking to the lawyer, and McLeod interrupts it. So there's like a 1-2 punch that happens where the lawyer's saying like, hey, I'll bring my client in, but you can't let this guy fuck him up again. You can't let him ruin his face.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm taking photos of him. And then you also have him, his partner saying to him something about like, you can't take the law into your own hands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the casting, like the Wyler, like softens the Douglas character McLeod a lot in the initial moments.
I think that's so. I think if it didn't have, that makes it sound like the book or the play is much more aggressively political. And I think one of the magical things about this film is that I think it is very. I think it has a strong point of view on policing in America, but I think it plays that so close to the vest that it's only when, like in the very last couple of minutes of the movie, that you realize that, or at least that I realized the first time that it had been kind of a screed the whole time.
Yeah. So the lawyer, Endicott Sims, which is a great name, but when his character first shows up, the actor Warner Anderson,
also
Jack
a good name.
I was like, holy shit, this guy's voice. He has one of those great mid-century cigarette voices, deep baritone. It was like, man, that guy could narrate my life story at my funeral. I'd be fine with it. But he is the lawyer of an abortionist is how I take it. They never say it.
Because they can't.
And then when he shows them, we don't see it, but he shows them nude photos of his client, and he says, if there's anything different after that, after McLeod gets done with him, then you're going to be in trouble, which is astonishing to think of a lawyer making a client have his entire body photographed nude because they're so afraid of what a cop is going to do to him, a specific cop. And Douglas is very much introduced heroically in this film. As a tough cop who's there for the victims, he's just a good guy in a system troubled by caving into the interests of the criminals.
If only they'd let him do his job. Am I right?
Yeah. But I have never. That is a first for me. It's like, hey, here's some nude photos of my client. He better look like this in 2 days.
That is something. I found that to be a really modern detail. Both times I watched it, Ken, and just relatedly, as I've dug into these 50s movies, like there are many movies that overtly they don't call it post-traumatic stress disorder, but there are a dozen movies from the 50s about guys who came back from the war wrong and are like crying and disheveled and in very sympathetic portraits, and then by the time Rambo happens, like that barely sympathetic portrait seems so revelatory about a way to acknowledge mental health issues with veterans. So a lot of what feels new is actually old. Such as acknowledging police brutality is a problem.
In both of these movies, there's a thread of these hardened men who have seen some shit, and the weak men who think they aren't, and the stories are kind of like the next one is kind of like the one guy not being a real man until he faces that, and then this one is kind of the end is one of those men saving someone from having to go into that life. But you're right. Underneath the surface, the subtext of both of these movies is the dynamic and the pull between the horrible parts of life, people who have seen some violence, and the people who haven't. And those two worlds kind of colliding is what's I find so fascinating about both of these movies.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, for the Desperate Hours, I think we end up talking a lot about performing masculinity in that. And I think what's really powerful about this film, because all of the detectives in the film, Detective Lou, Detective McLeod, they're the partners. They're too old to have gone to World War II.
Yeah.
So Brody had a son who died in it, and he has sympathy because of that. And they're seeing the fallout of it, but they aren't the generation that went to war.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I think plays out in both movies too. Is the quote unquote bad guys, the cat burglar in this movie, and then Humphrey Bogart's character in Desperate Hours, they were in jail instead of fighting. Right? Like they were doing crimes and paying penalties instead of going to war. And that's also a fascinating take on things.
Yeah, I think, I
don't actually know if that's true of Humphrey Bogart's character. I think that's wrong. But it's definitely true of the cat burglar in this movie.
Yeah, so one thing that I think is fascinating about this film is Kirk Douglas's McLeod cries. And no one, like Dr. No, the cat burglar. So Joseph Wiseman, who will go on to play Dr. No, is in this as, to my mind, a bonkers representation of an Italian cat burglar.
Oh, okay. You kept saying Dr. No. He is hilarious.
I didn't recognize him either. That's funny.
So he I guess, snickers a little bit during the crying scene. But I mean, it's a interesting moment in the film where everybody around him, and this is something I want to dive deeper into. Everyone around him's like, "Hey, you have the best wife ever. She's the most amazing gal.
Yeah.
Just don't be yourself for a moment." He's like, "I can't. I ruined my life. I want to commit suicide." So I think two interesting things about this film for me is, and I don't think that they work really well, but I'm curious for you guys. One is putting the wife on the pedestal. I have no idea why she's so great. Like nobody says anything. Nothing that she does necessarily means that she's great, aside that she puts up with McLeod's shit of not coming home very often, right? The other thing I'm really curious about is we have 4 criminals, I guess, that cycle through this. We have Lee Grant reprising her role as the shoplifter, who's, to my mind, the best part of the movie.
Yeah.
You have the cat burglar and his dumb accomplice.
Yeah, I love that guy.
You have the person who steals from his employer, the young kid who went to war.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the one thing that doesn't match those others, which is the abortionist, in which the Hays Code wouldn't let them actually say abortion. So he's like a family doctor or something, right? A unlicensed family doctor with a farm. But three of those are all just they're talking about larceny, or they're talking about like stealing, theft, right?
Yeah,
kind of property crimes. And the last one, and they all are treated with a lot of respect, but the one that's not is the abortionist,
right?
And so I think what's interesting is, without being able to call him an abortionist straight out, that maybe he performed abortions, but he was also maybe a family doctor, or would help women give birth and then give away the children. Like, there's something that's being, to my mind, being lost, and it's a very strange setup. Like, there's no murder, there's no in the film, there's no murderers, there's just all property theft, and then an abortionist.
Yeah.
So I don't know quite how to read that, but it seems like a strange setup for me.
Yeah.
They're all at different levels of theft, though. I mean, like the cat burglar has served time and will continue to serve time, and it was more orchestrated. And then the one guy did it for love, and then Lee Grant is just kind of desperate. So I think that they're all different shades of maybe the same crime, but I think they all represent something different. That, like Lee Grant and then the young guy who stole from his boss, they are people who can be saved. The cat burglar and his partner cannot, and I think those parallels are interesting anyway.
But you don't have an arsonist, you don't have a drunk driver, a hit and run driver, you don't have an anarchist with property damage, you don't have like all these other possible criminals. And so it seems like this interesting kind of like almost straw man.
Yeah.
That they're setting up for ideological purposes.
You 100%, and that to me is so much more apparent about the play based on what you said was different about the movie, Thomas. And I think I would still like a more direct adaptation of the play, but I think what makes this movie great, it turns out, is the little details that Wyler added. Maybe. I think part of it is that this is like, what do detectives do and think about when there is no murder, at the beginning. And of course, like I said, I've seen this one a couple times now, so some details stuck in on the second viewing. The very opening thing is inside the precinct is one of the detectives lamenting that there's been no murder, and what are they going to do today? And I hope a murder comes in is kind of, and that's meant to be like shocking, a little bit. I think the wife is an intentionally thin character, and that the whole thing is kind of a straw man, because similar to how I think 12 Angry Men is a sub rosa attack on the justice system, I think this movie is saying, with Kirk Douglas versus the other detective, you can enforce the law or you can protect and serve the populace, but trying to do both will drive anyone insane. And that's like, and Kirk Douglas loses his mind over the course of the day because he is actually a great detective and it's an impossible to do that job well.
Is he?
I think so. Yeah.
I think he's set up as being a typically heroic detective. And I think the great thing, if we want to talk performances, Douglas always using his movie star facade.
Yeah.
And then his interest in like the biggest part of his career of really playing terrible people, like in Ace in the Hole or The Bad and the Beautiful, is and to this, I think he uses it to maybe his best effect, because there are parts early on where he just seems like the guy, the cock of the walk. And then it kind of curdles a little bit, and then he comes back, and then by the end, you're like, well, this guy's a complete fucking psychopath.
Right. So
and yeah, his entire character arc is was the most surprising part of this movie. And also Lee Grant, to go back to her getting an Oscar nomination for this, playing a character who doesn't even have a fucking name, and like every scene she is in, she like completely steals it. That's the other theft and thief in the movie, is Lee Grant stealing every scene she's in.
Yeah. I mean, it does help that all the framing is set up. And one of the things that kind of started to bother me at different times is it's framed like, or the staging of it is like a stage play where everybody's kind of like one quarter turned out as opposed to looking to at each other.
Right.
And so you don't really get tight shot. Everything's like a 2-shot, right? Or bigger. And when they are closer in on people, they're standing at awkward angles, like it was a play. But I guess to go back, I guess, and hit it a little bit harder. What the thing that's interesting to me is that for the Douglas character, for McLeod, the idea is that there's gray in the world, and he should let the kid go. Whose his partner wants this to happen, other people want this to happen. He should let the kid go, who reminds his partner of his own son, because the kid stole some money. He knows that it was wrong. They're going to repay everything. It's going to be okay. His boss doesn't necessarily want to press charges, but because McLeod's mom went to an insane asylum and he thinks that his dad forced her to go there, he has a very black and white understanding of the law.
Yeah.
And because of that, the thing that's lost by not having the abortionist be called an abortionist is that then you get to, like, to me, okay, you have 3 thefts, right? They don't really hurt anybody per se. They might have hurt the boss a little bit, but they're not really like injuring people. And they're also done for 3 different reasons. One, because the guy's mixed up in love. One, because it seems like Lee Grant's just kind of spacey. And then the other one, because they're like career criminals. With the abortionist, he's actually providing, to my mind, a necessary service.
Right.
But that necessary service is against the law.
Right.
So it's like criminalization of drugs at some level. I don't know if drugs necessarily are, but I would say that an abortion is a necessary service to many people.
Yes.
But it's illegal.
Yes.
So that means that McLeod's brain kind of like has to melt, right? Because he's like, look, this thing's illegal. I am against illegality. It's necessary, but it's illegal. Oh shit, my wife had an abortion by this guy, and he's holding his chips over me. Like, there's all these interesting layers, but I don't think the film actually can delve into those because he can't actually call the abortion an abortion.
See, this is this may or may not be a persuasive argument to you, because genre theory versus auteur theory is very, a lot of very smart people disagree on subjects. But so one thing that I think Wyler does with all of his films is he is very aware that you are seeing 200 different presentations of a detective each year, and that in 199 of them, the badass like Kirk Douglas who punches people and is willing to use his gun to get the bad guy is cool. So like all of this, I think, is kind of not trying to present this is William Wyler's idea about crime and punishment, but he's saying like everything exists in relation to one another. And the detail, I think, about the different crimes that you're unpacking, Thomas, is every single one of these people should be in jail according to the law. At the end of the day, Lee Grant, the cat burglars, the abortionists, the vet, they all go to jail for at least 5 years, So Kirk Douglas is following the letter of the law, and it's literally everyone else around him at the police department where they are enforcing the law. Everyone he talks to all day is telling him, no, ignore that. That's not as important as the look in the eyes of this person sitting right in front of you. And I think that's like what the movie is really trying to get out, is like, you need to treat all these people with heart.
Wow. Can we ask our guest what he thought, Jack? You've been awfully quiet over here.
Sorry.
What are your thoughts on
Jack?
Detective Story?
I really liked it. It was great. I completely agree with everything Ryan just said. Yeah, and what year did this come out? Was it 51?
51, yeah.
I was very surprised that a movie like this was made in 1951 that had those very, they feel like very modern sensibilities about the state of policing and whatnot. And also abortion. I'm going to disagree with Thomas a little bit. I think that the Hays Code preventing them from saying the word itself actually made it a lot more powerful. And they got to use some clever writing to create some vivid imagery with Kirk Douglas's character McLeod calling him a butcher and talking about the medical room on his farm where he does it and whatever. Yeah, good stuff. And that's okay. This is another thing I was thinking about. That's the problem with making a movie with a protagonist who you're not supposed to agree with, maybe morally, and then casting someone like Kirk Douglas who's so fucking cool. You just want there to be a million McLeod movies.
Yeah.
There's different tastes in everyone.
Yeah.
I could watch him insulting people all day.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love to see the Dirty Harry series after, the next day, instead of quitting, he's just like, fuck it, mask off. Let's go shoot some bad guys.
Or he could do the George Costanza thing where he just shows up the next day and they're like, didn't you get shot and die yesterday? I was like, yeah, but that was a joke. I didn't quit. What do we got, guys? What's going on?
So, I guess to my mind, I think that if the doctor was performing births and abortions, it mitigates things a little bit. But that's, I think, also part of the Hays Code thing, or just like some of the social norms of the time, which make it very difficult for me to understand how I'm supposed to read some things.
Yeah.
And I think I get that a little bit in the next film, but I think this one is even harder for me because I'm alienated at different times, because the wife is a flat character, right? There's not a lot there, but she did lie by omission. And they, like, the movie opens up with them talking about, like, did you go to the doctor? Like, are you pregnant, basically? And it might be that she can't have children now afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's what she says later in the film when he confronts her about it.
But she's never said that to him. And so we don't know what they're like. I don't know how you get to a point in a marriage. I don't know how long they were married exactly. It probably says it in the film, but where you don't talk about, like, do you want to have kids? Like, do you want to adopt? Do you want to have a family?
She did want to have kids,
offspring?
but she just didn't know. It was her deep-seated fear that even at the end of the movie when she confesses it, she doesn't actually know that she can't have kids, but her deep-seated fear is that the abortion that she's never admitted to has made it so that she can't have kids. And so going into the film, she's already worried that he will leave her because she can't have kids.
Which could be a cry for legalizing abortion. Because if it had been legal and safe, she wouldn't have the problem, but she had to go to the farm abortionist.
Well, but legal, safe, and unstigmatized.
Yes.
Yeah.
To your point, though, Thomas, I think with the big country next week, this approach to social issues is going to come up again. And I think if you feel the same way about some of the things in that film, we will have some more points of agreement. And then we're not going to talk about the Children's Hour, but that is his movie with James Garner and Shirley MacLaine about...
Whoa. Shirley MacLaine has entered the chat, Thomas.
Uh-oh.
Did you know about this?
I'm going to get to watch that on my own. The wife's out of the house.
Because you guys did like this movie, I would urge you to see it. That one is about two teachers at a day school. Shirley MacLaine, I forget the other woman actress is famous as well. And Shirley,
hey, say her name 3 times, and I was gonna say she'll come, but I might.
Shirley MacLaine, for a third time, is in love with the other teacher, and so it's a closeted lesbian drama. And Thomas, I think what you're picking up here makes that movie like I think a well-intentioned but horrendous look at queerdom.
Well,
queerness.
The other part to that, if I remember right, and I haven't seen it, I just read about it in the Wyler book from Multnomah County Library.
Shout out.
Is that the play actually says lesbian, and and commits to them being gay, but the film does not. It's
yes,
at best innuendo.
Yes, that is one of the problems.
And that's one of the big problems of the film.
Yeah. And there is Thomas, I don't know if you how familiar you are with Joan Didion, but she has an essay about the inherent political problems with what she calls Hollywood liberalism. And Wyler is a very well-deserving target in that essay for the way he handles social films, because like Jack said, I'm shocked with almost all of his films to see how well he sees the problem. But I think a lot of times his idea of how we should solve the problem is hopelessly naive. So,
which is interesting, because I think that he has a darker side.
Yeah.
I mean, he fucking hated Nazis and did propaganda to get rid of Nazis. And like, he's against the House of Un-Americans committee, but like at the same time, he was for propaganda to get what he wants. So I think that he's 100% behind people taking action when it's action that he believes is correct.
Exactly. And to extend it, and when I brought it up in my little bio of him, when I said that I thought he kind of invented this idea of liberal Hollywood, I think ultimately you could argue that while I've seen 1,000 films that I love that come out of that tradition, I think it's ultimately been damaging to our political discourse to have so much of our art so aggressively one-sided about its politics, and yet always hiding the politics, like you're talking about, Thomas, where it's like, I think it's very potent that they can't say the abortionist, but that does prevent someone who might be pro-life from seeing this movie and really having any room within the film to agree with Kirk Douglas. Like, there are a lot of people that I would disagree with who would find Kirk Douglas to be 100% righteous in this movie. And there's no room for that in the film because they can't even talk about what the doctor does.
If you're talking about politics in films, I think that they're politically minded filmmakers on the other side of maybe where William Wyler was. Kirk Douglas's worldview of everything being black and white is how they see the world.
Right.
And to translate that into film, people with empathy and the ability to put themselves in other shoes have always made not all of, but most of the great art, because they can put themselves in the shoes of different people. Even like the next movie we're talking about, their sensitivity towards the two brothers that I don't think someone who sees morality as black and white from a more conservative point of view would ever get at. They would just see them as one thing, and that is it.
Yeah.
And also, can we talk about Phil?
Oh,
he is not McLeod's fucking secretary. Every fucking time McLeod's like, "Hey, call my wife and tell her I'm going to be a little late for dinner." And he's like, "Yeah, okay." Phil needs to advocate for himself. I am not your secretary, McLeod. Fuck off.
Yeah.
I have work to do.
Yeah. He was probably glad McLeod's dead at the end.
Yeah. He's like, McLeod's dead.
But you know what?
Tell your wife, tell her you're fucking dead.
What they cut from the end of the film actually was actor Burt Mustin as Willie the janitor coming in going, "Well, they made another mess for me. Who's going to have to clean up the blood? Hey, it's Willie the janitor, always cleaning up the blood."
McLeod took a couple of his own drop dead pills.
What's really great about the janitor showing up is for the first time he does, you can see him in the background pause because the two people in the foreground aren't done talking yet, and it's like he's coming on stage. Playing. It's very cool.
Well, one thing I actually did think was cool, but then they actually put a lantern on it, and I didn't like it much after that. Is the swinging door? So you have somebody in their blues.
Oh, same.
And the door swung, and the actor just puts his foot up to protect himself from getting hit from the swinging gate door. But then they call attention to it because McLeod fucks with him by holding the gate, 30 minutes after that.
Yeah.
And it lost something for me.
I had the exact same reaction because it was so lived in that first moment. I was like, oh, that's a nice touch. And then they have to call attention to it, and all the air went out of the balloon.
So I watched these films in opposite order.
Mm-hmm.
I watched The Desperate Hours first. And so I was surprised, talking about black and white, that we get a black cop in this, which I thought was cool. I mean, it's nowhere near like our first director of this series and having a little integration, but I was surprised. And he didn't, unlike Cube, would say he wasn't shelling out necessarily for the white cop beating him people, trying to like prove himself. It was just it was just like a casting decision of like, this is a great actor, put him in.
Yeah. And there's we are not watching, one of the films I thought about putting on my 4x4 was Jezebel, which won Bette Davis her first Oscar, I believe, and also stars Henry Fonda. That movie is an intentional fuck you to Gone with the Wind. And one of the ways, and it gets into some of the things you're talking about, some of the nuances with abortion, Thomas. So that movie prominently features many of the black servants that work for Bette Davis's Southern Belle, but they are very much her family, and it's very much, it makes the tension of them being slaves. That's like one of the subjects of the movie is, here's this rich, spoiled white lady, and she is surrounded by all of these black people who would do anything for her. And she kind of knows that, but still employs them instead of just loving them as a family. So he likes to do racial stuff. In his last film, which we're also
The Liberation of L.B. Jones.
Yeah, that one, which I haven't seen and is evidently not very successful, is explicitly a race picture, as they would have said.
And it's supposed to be one of the most, like at the time in 1970, edgy.
Yeah, he literally saw Putney Swope and was like, bet I can do that. And I don't think he can from what the Movie Madness people told me.
Oh, wait, you know what? I've seen The Collector. I'm looking at his filmography now. I've seen The Collector.
Oh,
Wait,
yeah.
the remake or the original?
The original 1965.
Oh, okay.
We're watching that one next week.
Oh, okay, we're watching Big Country and The Collector. That's
a real weird. I haven't seen The Collector, but because of the subject matter, I thought there was a time when I was considering that you guys would hate all of the movies except for maybe The Collector. So I put it in there just because it has the more outre subject matter.
Well, the Friendly Persuasion, or just Friendly Persuasion, has my boyfriend in it. So
who's your boyfriend?
Perkins.
Oh, I didn't know he was in that. I've been curious about that one. That one seems like it should be the absolute most boring of his films, which makes me think it might secretly be the best.
William Wyler has a movie called Carrie from 1952 that is not about a young high school girl with psychokinetic powers.
There are, I stopped counting at 17 movies from East Asia called Detective Story. And none of them seem to have anything to do with this, but I was just fascinated that that's such a common, and it's kind of a good idea. Like, here's just a generic movie about a bunch of detectives.
Well, is there anything else you guys want to talk about? You want to talk about the Dick Tracy link? And we can start talking about Dick Tracy, the 1990 film.
You got one of them watches?
She is maybe the best surrogate character, like audience surrogate character in anything I've ever seen. Both the way she's written and the way she acts it, it's never a distraction when you, like you guys said, she steals every scene she's in. So when you go back to her, it's never like a distraction that you're having to keep up with this side character who's not important. It's like, oh yeah, we get to hang out with this chick again. What's she up to? What's she worried about right now?
And she really is the audience surrogate in the sense that she comes into the film and she's just stuck there.
Yeah.
And we're kind of like just stuck there watching everything go on, and we're not involved in it. Like we are, in some way, we got our fingerprints when we bought the tickets, but we're just not like, and we're observers in a similar way. But yeah, I wish that Lee Grant hadn't had her career destroyed.
Same. I was thinking of that this entire movie.
That's really sad.
She could have owned the 1950s as an actress.
What happens with her?
HUAC.
Yeah, what is that?
House of Un-American Activities. They ferreted out so-called communists in Hollywood. And she got blacklisted because of her husband, if I'm remembering right, Thomas.
Well, she made some comments as well in sympathy.
Yeah.
Public comments, but I think it was predominantly because of her husband. Yeah.
So her entire 1950s was basically gone after she got an Oscar nomination for this movie, and it looked like the future was bright, and then kneecapped her career, and then she slowly came back through television in the early 1960s
Columbo?
with Peyton Place, and then Columbo in the early 70s.
Oh,
Nice.
I've been wanting to see some Peyton Place because of the Twin Peaks connection. Some really cool little details that I thought were fascinating about this movie, just in how police procedure has changed. That they do the lineups right there in the you don't need to go to a special room. There's no anonymity. Like I've seen this in British films before, but never in an American film. Like if some guy assaults you and then he gets arrested and you go to give a statement, he's getting booked 2 tables down while you're telling the cop what's happening. Like that guy could just be looking at you being like, I'm going to fucking kill you after we leave if you say anything, my dude. And it would all be fine. Like there's nothing that the cops could do about it.
You have to be able to confront your accuser.
And also to be honest, part of the stage boundness of this, it's necessitated that everything's so compressed. It's almost like, again, Barney Miller, where it's like the entire squad room where they talk to everybody, and then there's a little jail cell in the background, and then Barney's office off to the side. It's almost exactly the same as this set, actually.
That's true. Yeah,
I don't know what inspiration they got from
one of the things I think is a strong argument for me not reading anything about a film prior to seeing it is that I kept expecting this film, because it has me go into a film with a certain idea of what it was going to be like, and a tone, and I thought this was going to be closer to a Dirty Harry film, not with chase scenes or school buses,
but the attitude,
singing "Row, row, row your boat," but the attitude. And it definitely wasn't.
Right.
Even the assault of the abortionist in the back of the paddy wagon isn't as brutal as I was going to expect. And it's still terrible, but that's the whole point, is that it's terrible, right? No one should be beat up. But I just didn't... I thought there was going to be like a Joker moment. I'm sorry, not a Joker moment, but the Dark Knight moment, where something crazy was going to happen in the back of that paddy wagon. It was going to flip over. No.
No, we'd have to wait until the desperate hours to see a truck flipped over. Teaser for next week. I felt the same way, and toward the end of the movie, when Douglas's character is like, he loses her, he wants her back, and then you realize that he's just a fucking psycho, and he cannot change from being that, and he's going to lose her, and he should lose her. That I thought this movie would have been perfect if it had come out 22 years later, like a year after Dirty Harry, because it almost seems like the complete counter to Dirty Harry, in a positive way.
Yes, I think that's very true, and I think it says a lot about how I'm sure that this movie and a lot of Wyler's work was on the cutting edge in the way it was willing to address these social issues, but it says a lot about how little progress we made, or how much we went backwards from the 70s to the 2000s, that some of these takes on police brutality and stuff feel shockingly relevant.
I should say Dirty Harry is one of my all-time favorite movies, so I'm not
it's a fucking great
Dirty
movie.
Harry.
No, that's and that you something that I was thinking about that you were talking about earlier, Ken, Wyler versus someone like John Ford, and how they're both active at the same time, and they are their movies are all in kind of conversation with one another, and even their style is like, Ford was like 2 or 3 takes and go if he could, and Wyler's like, no, we're going to do 40 takes, and we're going to tell a very nice, tidy story about these people and why they're good, and why you shouldn't just go out and shoot people like John Wayne does, and it's all very interesting.
It's interesting, the movies.
Yeah, just on that 2 takes, 3 takes, just I know we're trying to wrap up, but Douglas, according to the book, says that Wyler was a strange director. He didn't direct you. He just said, do it again until he got what he wanted.
It worked. I mean, he's got uniformly great performances from a wide range of actors with ages and experience in both these movies. And they're all phenomenal across the board. So whatever he did worked.
Yeah, even in The Big Country, he gets a nuanced performance out of Charlton Heston, which should be fucking impossible. Because it definitely doesn't happen any other time.
In the next movie, he gets a pretty good performance from a stupid little kid.
That's true.
Which is very, very tough historically.
Yeah. So. Way better than the
especially
Beaver
the stupid kids.
Yes. Just be
Haley Joel Osment was smart. Like, imagine if he was dumb.
Thank you for bringing William Wyler to us, Ryan. These first two movies were great.
I'm really glad that that you guys liked them. Like I said, I was worried that having seen them alone and in a vacuum, I was worried they might be really trad, boring stuff to other people.
If my options are a thumbs up or a thumbs down, I guess it's a thumbs up.
Is that it? Are we going to thank Ryan for the theme song?
Thanks, Ryan.
Hey.
Yeah, you should stick around for the next pairing, or the next part of this pairing, which will be The Desperate Hours.
Yeah,
with Humphrey Bogart.
Yeah, and look, if you can't get enough of us, follow us on socials. We post all across all the socials except for X and Truth, but that might be changing soon. If you can't get enough of our voices, we also have our sister podcast, Blue Lives Matter. It's our podcast about Belgium's favorite export, the Smurfs.
And also my occasional trips to see the Blue Man Group in various cities across the country.
True. And then, of course, there's ACAB, our podcast dedicated to Scorsese film, Taxi Driver. And I know this might be coming out a little late, but you got to listen to Travis Bickle's Election Day coverage. So that'd be live stream.
Oh, boy.
That's it.
Thanks, dude.
Good stuff.
Next week, Desperate Hours. Desperate Hour. It's going to be a desperate hour talking about. Anyway, shut up, Ken.
My name is Thomas. I'm from Portland, Oregon.
I'm not talking at you.
Right, bye,
I'm
guys.
talking to you. I don't want to hear about you. I want to hear from you. It's 10-4. 10-4, old buddies. Destroy. Kill all hippies.
I don't hate it. I just don't know why you strayed from the formula.
You bastards! In case you don't know it, Bob, I'm an artist. And I must reflect that in my rhyme.
And Willie was a little wild. He got into one little fight and his mom got scared. So she sent him off on a ship to go to work for his cousin and get some fresh air on the way to America, that is.
Give that man a raise. This picture's going to do gangbusters.
It's interesting, the movies.